And then somewhere around 2014 or so, I stumbled into a place in Chicago where I lived at the time called Graceland Cemetery, and I wholeheartedly realize that most people don't take their coffee and walk around in graveyards for fun. But like I said, I love history. I love forgotten history. I like interesting architecture, and I like ghost stories. And you can really find all of those things in a graveyard. And so I'm really hoping that my books kind of create a new generation of reader that realizes that like the only way we can really honor history is to remember it and to treat it with respect, and kind of looks at these things with a slightly different viewpoint.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to A Literal Journey, a show where I interview fantastic authors of fantastic stories. And today's guest is a great get. It's been a long time coming, Lindsay. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. It's just truly an honor to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, Lindsay Currie is a number, and I said that right, Currie, right?
You got it. Yep.
Oh, okay, good,
First
good.
try.
Yeah. Lindsay Currie is the #1 New York Times bestselling author and a USA Today bestselling author of mysteries for young readers, including the Delta Games series and It's Watching. She grew up on Nancy Drew and loves a good twisty tale. When she's not writing, Lindsay can generally be found looking for an adventure of her own. She loves researching forgotten history and recently relocated from Chicago to a 220-acre farm in downstate Illinois, where she finally gets to see stars every night and takes hikes every day. Lindsay, once again, thank you so much for being on the show, and give our listeners, our viewers, a little bit of a backstory. Tell us your story and how you got into storytelling.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I love it, especially when I visit schools and I get this question, how did you become a writer? At what point did you start doing this? And it's funny, I can remember having a very vivid imagination when I was very, very small. I don't think at that time it equated with the idea of becoming an author or becoming a writer in any way, because back then too, we didn't have author visits. I never met an author. That's not something that ever crossed my mind, but I did like to tell stories. And I grew up in a very small town, in a family that, had to be very careful with money because we didn't have hardly any. So we didn't take a lot of fancy trips, and I never went on airplanes and things like that. So I spent a ton of time reading. Books were the way I explored other people and places and cultures in the world. And so I think when you read as much as I did and you have this vivid imagination, these things kind of go hand in hand. And I also loved writing. It wasn't until I was honestly in my 30s and my husband started kind of pushing me to consider sharing some of my stories, to think about pursuing writing as a career as opposed to just something I did for me that made me feel like me, right? Or made me feel satisfied as a person. That I actually tried to do anything with that. So it's been a very interesting journey for me. It's part of the reason I love doing as many school visits as I do. I travel so much during the year. And a lot of that is, yes, bookstore events and library events and things, but a lot of it is school visits where I get to get in front of hundreds and hundreds of kids, right? And tell them, do you like telling stories like I did? Because this is a job, this is a career. For me, it's my dream job. And if that's something you want to do, you can do it too. And it's very, very cool to be able to have that impact. I think if I'd heard that when I was younger, my journey might have been a little bit different. It might have started earlier, to be honest.
So a lot of authors can really point to a book or a story, a certain book or story, or an author like C.S. Lewis or something, that their books or their writings, it felt like a doorway
Mm,
to either a world of magic and wonder, or hey, I want to actually create something like this on my own. Was there a
yeah.
book or a series that really ignited that for you?
Yes, I'm afraid I really feel like I cause PTSD when I say the name of it, so I guess prepare yourself. But I guess I was probably in maybe fifth grade when I read Where the Red Fern Grows for the
Oh, yeah.
first time. I know. So a heavy book, right, with a lot of complicated topics, maybe not the easiest book to read either, really, right? Like even the language and everything. And it was also so foreign from my existence at that age. I knew nothing about the Ozarks. I knew nothing about hunting. I had no desire to hunt, right? It was a very different thing, but it was also such a amazing book in the sense that I felt all of the emotions reading that, right? I was excited. I was happy. I was sad. I was angry. I was hurt, right? But I also felt all of those emotions so vividly. And it was, I think, my first experience with, what I would call a window book, like a book giving you a window that's so vivid and real into a different kind of world. And that was pretty magical. I mean, I still remember getting that book more than once and reading it so many times that my little paperback cover fell off. And I wish I could point to it and say that's the book that made me want to be a writer. It didn't, but that's the book that really made me respect and like appreciate what writers do, because it transported me, I think, in a way that other stories hadn't before that.
Was that like a school assignment book, a reading in class, or did you just pick that up on your own?
I distinctly remember the first time I got it. So we used to have something in school called RIF. Back in the day, it stood for Reading is Fundamental. So it was
Oh,
like a program. RIF still exists today, by the way. I don't know if it works exactly the same as it did when I was a kid, but it was a day where they would come into the school and they would go into the library and they brought specific books with them and they put them all over the library tables. And then you could go in as a student and pick any of those books and it was yours. You
wow.
got to keep it for free. You weren't just renting it, or borrowing it, you were keeping it. And I picked up Where the Red Fern Grows because there was a dog on the cover. Old Dan, little Ann on the cover right there. And I was like, wow, this looks cool. And it also looked, the original cover for that had kind of a little bit of a dark, spooky-ish vibe. I can still visualize it. And that was it. I mean, after I read that book, I had to recover a little bit, but I read it again and again. So it wasn't required reading, but it was definitely one I maybe wouldn't have stumbled across if it hadn't been for that program.
Mine was, in fact, I've got it. Hold on. Mine was Redwall by Brian Jakes.
Oh,
Let's see this one.
oh my goodness. Look at how loved
And
that is.
well, this one, so this one is from the barcode over here.
Library book.
It's from my school. It's the same copy that our teacher read to us. And then my school, they built a new school. So that school building closed down and they were selling all of these books. And I went back when I was 22 and I bought the exact copy that my teacher.
That's honestly the coolest thing ever. I think that's just spectacular. I love that. And I love that it's right there on your shelf, reminding you of really the moment when that passion and that love was ignited in you. That's so cool.
Well, and it was a teacher, and I've learned that. So reading is fundamental. You said riff, and reading is
Mhm.
fundamental. I mean, it was fifth grade, and our teacher read it, and she had an Americanized accent, but she was British.
Okay.
And so she would do the voices, and they were like real
Spot
British
on.
voices. Yeah. And I was like, what is this place? What is this? And that was the gateway. It just opened up reading and
Opened your world beyond wherever
Mhm.
you were. I mean, that's where the Red Fern grows, and so many other books. I mean, on the spooky side, I remember reading the Dollhouse Murders not too far
Oh
after, around the same
yeah.
time, and I think that was the first time I read a spooky book that, I mean, there wasn't as much middle grade as there is now, right? I mean, now we have so many incredible middle grade authors, so many fantastic stories, layered, nuanced, amazing things for young readers to pick from. But back then, I feel like there was really kind of a gap. And
Mhm.
especially in the spooky area, which is why a lot of us started, reading things like Stephen King, stuff like that way before we should have, right? Um,
Yes.
we're lucky we're okay. But
Yeah.
um,
Are we? Are we
yeah,
okay?
I know. Are we really okay? Question of the day.
Yeah.
But the Dollhouse Murders, I remember being legitimately frightened. And then, that was back before Kindles and reading things digitally. So I actually had my little paperback and, kind of how you imagine like a flashlight. It was way past bedtime. I was not supposed to be reading. Definitely big imagination. Lindsay shouldn't have been reading something scary after bedtime, but I was, and it was deliciously fun. Like I really think that was the first time I read something that was scary that made me feel kind of accomplished when I finished it, and maybe planted that little seed of, ooh, I like to be scared a little bit. As long as I actually know I'm safe, right?
Yeah. Well, it definitely seems like your genre is uh, books with a scary uh, tinge to them, at least at a
Yeah.
minimum. And so, what was it really? Was it Dollhouse Murders that got you into that genre and has
I
kept
think
you
so.
there?
I mean, just can't remember a time when I didn't love spooky things in general. And this sounds like, again, like a big generalization, but like Halloween has always been my favorite
Yeah.
holiday. I mean, I distinctly remember, when my dad, who was the one who would take me trick or treating when I was little, when he finally said, "We have to go home," like I'm wet and half frozen, like we're done trick or treating, I would go home and like pile all the leaves in our yard up into a pile next to our front door, and I would crawl under it. And then I
Mm.
would wait for other kids whose parents didn't make them go home yet. And when they got up to my front door to trick or treat, I would pop out of those leaves. Little Lindsay was just as sinister as big Lindsay, I think. I think it's just like a part of my personality, but the Dollhouse Murders really brought that out and made me seek out more books and also writing spooky stories just for myself. I remember trying to write short, like little short stories that featuring scary things, and I've always been into ghosts. Ghosts, those are pretty classic for me.
Well, that's fundamental for me as well. I mean, that
Mm.
was I grew up in Alaska, and fall wasn't really existent up there. It doesn't happen. It just goes from
Yeah.
summer to winter.
Mm.
And so whenever I watched movies about fall or Halloween, I was like, that's not real. That's Hollywood. That's fake. That's so I
Yeah.
watched Hocus Pocus and I was like, that's it. No,
Whatever.
they got to wear their coats in the snow to go trick or treating. And then
Yeah.
we moved to
That's so
Utah
funny.
and I saw Halloween and I was like, oh my gosh, this is
And
real.
leaves, I bet, and all of these
Yeah.
things. That's
Colors
crazy.
change. It was incredible. It was
And you were
incredible.
hooked.
And I was that Halloween is my favorite holiday as well. I mean, we were having a conversation before about cryptids and stuff. I just
Oh, yeah.
fascinated with
I
ghosts,
think we
cryptids,
have a lot of
graveyards.
similarities.
I
A lot
do.
of overlap.
A lot of overlap. So then what was your first either story? We could start with a story that you wrote when you
Yeah.
were younger, or your first novel that you thought I could publish this.
So my first middle grade novel, I actually set out to, I mean, years and years ago, I actually tried writing picture books, right? My kids were younger. And I remember thinking, I know little kids, like I can write picture books. And knowing that age group doesn't necessarily mean that's what your voice is going to be like for that age group. And I really struggled. I got a lot of rejections. It was, obviously it stung and it was really disheartening. And I think I kind of backed off for a long time then. And then somewhere around 2014 or so, I stumbled into a place in Chicago where I lived at the time called Graceland Cemetery, and I wholeheartedly realize that most people don't take their coffee and walk around in graveyards for fun. But like I said, I do like, I love history. I love forgotten history. I like interesting architecture, and I like ghost stories. And you can really find all of those things in a graveyard. And so I wandered around there for an afternoon and came across a really, really fascinating grave. And I ended up writing a manuscript that was aimed at middle graders called, at the time, it was called Graceland Avenue. And I was agented at this point. I had an agent, and I showed her this manuscript and I said, I feel pretty strongly about this. It's a ghost story, but it's also it's a mystery. It's my favorite genre. And she put that book out on submission, and it ended up, fortunately for me, it sold to Aladdin, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster, and it released in 2017. And that book has really kind of set me on a trajectory of having the opportunity to write ghost stories and spooky stories and mysteries for young readers ever since then. I've been very fortunate, but that was really kind of my first, get my foot in the door moment, you know?
Well, then, is it still named, Graceland Avenue, or did
It
it go
is
a different
not.
way?
It is called The Peculiar Incident on Shady Street.
Oh! That was
Yeah.
my introduction to you. That
What
was
was it?
yes, I
That book
read
still has such a spot in my heart, because,
oh,
it features, one of Chicago's most prominent and I guess famous ghost legends, but also a ghost legend that has been so twisted and warped over time. Like, the actual story is completely untrue. And so when I wrote this book, yes, I wanted it to be scary. I wanted it to be a ghost story. I wanted to kind of pull in those reluctant readers, but I think that was the first time that I actually let my love of history come out into the book as well then. I mean, readers don't necessarily know when they pick up one of my books. You really can't tell from the cover that you're going to get a bunch of history.
mhm.
You're probably going to get some chills. It's going to be a little bit scary, right? But I do like to work that forgotten history in there. And in that case, in that book, it was just mistold history, right? I mean, it's a little bit like the game of telephone. Things are told and handed down over years and years and years. And often the story that you end up with is actually nothing like what actually happened. And I love revealing those things and highlighting them in books when I can.
Yeah, that was I remember listening to I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I have
Yeah. Oh,
kids, I'll
same.
be commuting, and I was listening to that book. You've got great narrators for all of your
Oh,
audiobooks,
I've
by
been
the way.
so lucky.
So
Yes. So
lucky.
talented.
Yeah, and I was listening to that one. I remember my daughter was like 2. I was walking late at night, put her in the stroller, walk her to sleep out in
Yeah.
Arizona, and I remember that. Vividly remember reading that. Good.
Oh,
It was a
that's so
great book.
fun. I
Great.
I still really love that book, and I'm still very proud of it and grateful that I had the chance, for that book to come out because, when you write something like that that is so centered on a specific thing in a specific area, it's amazing when you develop readers from all over the country who identify with the themes in it and are excited about that particular thing. I mean, after that book came out, I received tons of mail from kids who, young readers who lived in Chicago, but also who didn't even live in the state, who traveled to Graceland Cemetery to see that
Wow.
sculpture. I would get pictures, God bless these parents, for listening to their kids who'd read a book that they were excited about and said, "Can you take me to see this?" Because, asking your parents to take you to a graveyard isn't actually very, typical. And them doing it and supporting that. So I would get pictures of kids with my book in front of this grave. And it was such a cool sensation that I was unlocking that piece of history for them. So, the peculiar incident on Shady Street followed the story of a girl who, at the beginning of the book, is relocating from Florida to Chicago. She is relocating in the fall. And, if you've ever been in Florida or Chicago in the fall or both, you know that it is a very different vibe in these places. I
Yeah.
mean, the temperature, the feel in the air, even down to the architecture in these two places feels very, very different at this time of year, any time of year really, but especially when it's starting to get cold in Chicago. So she's relocating. She's not happy about it. She moves into this house where some very sinister, unexplainable things start happening. She is an artist, and whatever is happening seems to be happening to her art as well and kind of connecting with her in this way through her artwork, but she's not understanding what it is until she begins to realize that might actually be a ghostly presence that she's dealing with. And then the remainder of the book is very much her trying to figure out who it is that's reaching out to her, why she's being haunted, using these new friends that she's developed in Chicago to solve this mystery. And then for the reader too to solve, like, really, why was my character targeted to begin with? What is that commonality or that common thread between her and the ghost that's connecting them?
On that note, this was gonna be a later question, but on that note, what role have your children played in helping you write your stories?
Mm. Honestly, my kids are such a huge inspiration to me. And I think most parents would probably answer something similar, but I find them to be some of the kindest, most empathetic people I've ever met. I wish I could take credit for all of this. I think it's something innate in all of them. And and they're so motivated and they're so motivational with me. So my kids were young, but still aware when I started out in publishing and when all of the failure was happening. And it's very hard to go through many years of pushing on something and trying something and not getting anything back. And I just remember my kids always being very SpongeBob like about it, right? Like always supporting and being positive, even when it was hard for me to do that. And I do put little bits and pieces of them into my characters. It's hard not to because I
Yeah.
find my kids to be so inspiring that sometimes I'll take like just a little something that they said or maybe an element of their personality and I'll smash that together with some other things and I'll create this character, but somewhere in that character there's just a little facet of one of my kids, as a little bit of an homage to them.
So then when you published your so when you published your first book, I mean, was there immediate success? Did you see something and then your kids were watching this as well and going, "Wow, this is our mom. Look what she's doing."
I mean, even just seeing it turn into a book, right?
Yeah.
Holding a physical book and seeing it in bookstores was a incredible experience for all of us. Anytime we went anywhere, and at that point I was way too afraid to introduce myself to people in bookstores. So I would never want to go up to the counter and be like, "Hi, I'm Lindsay. I wrote this book." Eventually you have to get past that and do it. But we would always go looking for the book to see if it was there. And it was so exciting anytime we found it. That was just a moment. And then that book, luckily for me, that book found a lot of readers. A lot of readers ended up liking that book and it found its way onto a variety of state award lists, as a nominee, which is huge, for middle grade. It helps, expose more readers to your story. And so having my kids kind of see that full circle moment, actually now in hindsight, even though some of those moments initially felt like failures to me and I was embarrassed, I mean, I think when you're not succeeding at something, especially in front of your kids, there is a natural human instinct to feel embarrassed. But I'm really glad I went through that with them watching, because I do think now they understand you are going to have those experiences in life. And if you really want something badly enough, you need to not give up on that thing.
Yeah, and I will say you hold a Smith record in our household because I would take my kids to the bookstores and because they were so little, I really couldn't stop to look at and read a book. So
Yeah.
what I would have to do is like if I saw a book that I would potentially want, they're over there playing in the Barnes and Noble with the
Yeah.
trains and stuff. I would take a picture of, okay, I want to read that book, and I want to read that book, I want to read, and I would go home to read the,
Yeah. Read the blurbs.
back,
Yeah.
yeah, the blurbs. And you hold the record because I put in on my iPhone, I put in Lindsay Currie, like I was looking up your name, and it was just almost all of your books were the ones I had taken pictures of
Oh,
more
that
than
makes
any
me
other
really
author.
happy. Well,
Yeah,
we need,
your
well,
books.
the other thing the person we need to credit with a lot of that, is really the illustrator. I've gotten very lucky to have incredible illustrators for my
Yeah,
books. And even though I know we all say, don't judge a book by its cover, we do.
we do. Yeah.
You have to make a decision when you're in a bookstore, in a place that sells books, and that cover is what really pulls people in and makes them even want to read the blurb to begin with. So I'm just over the moon about the illustrations on my books and how lucky I have been with these artists.
Oh yeah, yeah, very very good looking books. I mean, again, I took pictures of all of them, and then
That makes me so
I've read three of them, three of your books so far. Halfway through another one, but great books,
yay.
great writing, great cover art, great narrators. I mean, you've hit a lot of these like really amazing notes on your books. After you got your first book published, what was going forward? What did they ask the publishers to do? Did they offer you another contract? Did
Yeah,
they?
so this was another big life lesson. Because I think sometimes we're under the perception that once you get your foot in the door, it's going to be kind of smooth sailing. This is not true.
Mhm.
I sold The Peculiar Incident on Shady Street, and that was edited by a lovely editor named Amy Cloud, at Aladdin. But Amy moved on to a different publisher after that book released, and was someone else came in and kind of took her place who wasn't really as into horror. or spooky stories or ghost stories or the types of things that I felt passionate about writing. And so I kind of at that point had to start looking for a new home for what I wanted to write, because I really felt like I had found my niche, the thing
Yeah.
I really feel passionate about writing about. And that's something I always tell aspiring writers, is if you find that thing, write about that thing. It comes through in your writing. Don't write to make other people happy.
Right.
Write what makes you happy and what you feel strongly about. And I didn't want to give that up. And so I wrote another book that took 2 years to find a publisher.
Wow.
It was another very long stretch of no's. And despite having Peculiar Incident doing well and showing up on the state award lists, with publishing, there are no guarantees.
No.
And so it was another real dry spell. And then my second book that came out after that one happened to be Scritch Scratch, which came out with Sourcebooks Young Readers in 2020. And that was another real learning experience because it was COVID.
Yep.
And at that point, bookstores were closed. Most schools were closed. It was very difficult to find readers. And I thought that book was going to just come out and then essentially crumble into dust, or whatever books do that don't get any attention and nobody reads. And I ended up getting so lucky with that book, because that one also ended up on a lot of state award lists. It actually won some state awards, and it ended up finding its readers, despite the huge amount of time it took to find a publisher for that book and being COVID. So I feel like there was something magical was on my side with that book.
Well, absolutely. And my follow-up question, we've touched on it a little bit, but with COVID and with the editor changing jobs, I mean, every protagonist in a good story will meet resistance,
Yep.
obstacles to overcome.
Yeah.
What were some of the obstacles that you faced as a writer, either internally or externally, and how did you overcome those, or maybe a memorable moment of overcoming?
Yeah, you know what? I think that for me in particular, and I just don't think this is ever going to go away. I'm sure you've heard this from other writers, but it really doesn't matter how many books I write. There is always a tendency for me to doubt myself and my writing. And very early on, I learned not really to look at the vast majority of reviews, especially once a book is out, because really all that can do for me is shake my confidence, even worse than I'm capable of doing myself, and I'm good at it. So I think my biggest challenge with every book is that I have a vision in my head of what I want that book to be. And the thing that I think now that I didn't think when I was writing Peculiar Incident, my brain was just blissfully did not have this thought in it, was now that I have a readership, I don't want to let them down. I want every book to be as good, if not better, than the last one. These people are trusting me, and they're spending money on my stories. Like at the end of the day, people are spending money to read stories that I've written, and I just don't want to let anyone down or disappoint anyone. And that can be kind of a crippling thought when you're writing, if I'm being
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Well, every good book has themes that reveal themselves over time. I've noticed a lot of amazing themes in your books. Kids who are dealing with self-doubt, like you just talked about, and trying to overcome tremendous challenges. What themes seem to speak to you, seem to reveal themselves over time in your books? Which themes do you feel are the most important?
I think, I'm first of all, I'm as since you've read a few of my books, I'm pretty awful to my characters sometimes, because as you point out, they do need to be, facing adversity, right? Like I do
Mhm.
put a lot of I like to start a book by understanding my main character and what my main character wants the most. And then my job is to really find ways to make that hard for them to get. And I think one of the biggest themes that you'll get out of a lot of my books is that sometimes what we want or we think we want is very different from what we actually need. And so often at the end of my books, while, regardless of whether or not it's one of my adventure mystery books, like The Mystery of Locked Rooms or House with No Keys, or it's a spooky one, right? Like X Marks the Haunt or It's Watching, I think you're going to see that at the end of the book, what the character ends up getting. I'm never going to end a book with, and then they all die, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's middle grade. We're going to have that ribbon of hope, right? But it's also not going to probably be perfect. And I think my whole rationale with that is that, the real world just generally isn't perfect. And sometimes we have to accept that, you know, we have limitations, and maybe we're going to be given what we need, not necessarily what we originally wanted, but hopefully by the end of my books my character has a new perspective anyway, right? The end of this journey, they realize maybe this is what they needed all along, right? Maybe, they just didn't understand that at the outset of the book. So I do think that's something that you'll notice in a lot of my stories, is this kind of personal realization with my characters of kind of maybe what they were overlooking at the start of their journey.
So at the beginning of this interview, before we even started recording, we were talking
Mhm.
a little bit about your latest book, X Marks the Haunt. Could you give our readers a little insight into that book? And hey, yeah, there it is. And see, again, beautiful covers.
So
I mean,
beautiful. I wish I had actually brought the hardback for you, because this is actually Delacorte's so great to do this, but my publisher is releasing this in hardback and paperback on the same day.
wow.
So simultaneously, yeah. So you have two different price points for this book, which is so great, because let's be honest, hardbacks are really expensive and not all readers are collectors and need a full hardback, right? Like sometimes you just want to read the story in a paperback is fine. And, $8 or whatever the paperback will be. What will the paperback be? $9, 8.99 or whatever the paperback will be, is so much better than, the alternative if you just want the story. But anyway, I digress. So sorry, you were saying, what is it
that's
about?
that's perfectly fine. Yeah, give our readers or our listeners, not our readers, give
Yeah.
our listeners sort of an idea of what the book is about. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how it's personally, you said this is a personal book for you.
Yeah. So X Marks the Haunt is actually about a boy named Will Stone, whose mother is the executive direct. We're going to have to back that one up. Um, his mom, Will Stone's mother in X Marks the Haunt, is the executive director at Graceland Cemetery. So we're back to Graceland here. We talked about it a little bit with the peculiar incident on Shady Street. And um, so he has grown up in this environment, right? And I really like the idea with this book of taking something that is inherently frightening to most people, like a cemetery,
Mhm.
and turning that on its head and showing a character who's actually quite comfortable there. And not only is he comfortable there, but he's very protective of that space, because he is so comfortable there. And so in this book, it's not something he really shares with everyone, his connection to the graveyard, because he is acutely aware that classmates might think it's a little odd that he spends so much time in a graveyard. But his connection to it is inadvertently kind of outed because his school takes a field trip there, and everyone kind of puts the pieces together, and he's targeted by kind of a bully in his grade. And long story short, a crypt key, this key you see on the front, so a key to one of the tombs or the mausoleums, is lost. And Will is a part of how this got lost and why this got lost. And that unleashes what appears to be some sort of dark spirit in the graveyard, and extremely bad things start happening that really Will takes responsibility for. A place that he loves is kind of crumbling around him, and terrible things are happening. And it's really up to him and these new friends that he has, this new friendship he's kind of created. They're trying to solve who it is, why they're doing it, and do it all before something truly terrible happens. So it is definitely one of my scarier books, I would say, to be honest.
Oh, I love it already. I'm going to be so excited. Okay, but you said this is a very personal story for you, and
Yeah.
I would assume it's not because you had the similar experience of finding a key and
No, thank
unleashing
goodness.
an
I'm
evil
not
spirit.
nearly as brave as my characters. If something starts haunting me, I am out of here. I'm done. I'm not, yeah. No, Graceland, as I mentioned, to you before, I think before the interview started, really is, I think, a very special place, because if you imagine Chicago, right? Chicago is very chaotic, it's very loud, it can be overstimulating, right? But Graceland is over 100 acres right in the middle of the city, and you have this like bubble, right, of quiet and solitude. And I realized that a lot of people would find that area, the area within Graceland's walls, to be eerie and scary. And I understand that, but graveyards were never intended to just be that. I mean, graveyards, and cemeteries were originally intended for people to come in and spend time there. There's a reason why a lot of them, like Graceland, have ponds. People used to come in and fish. They would have picnics there. They would hang out for the day. It was meant for you to come in and spend time as a way of paying respect to loved ones that are buried there. And we've lost a lot of that. That really isn't how we view graveyards anymore. And a lot of them, including Graceland, are trying to get back to that. They're trying to showcase their architecture, to showcase these stories of the people who are buried there, and to bring people in. You want to take a bike ride, come through Graceland. It's a beautiful day for it. And something about that is very, very cool to me, especially as someone who loves history and forgotten history as much as I do, because you can walk into any city anywhere and visit their graveyard and learn so much about the people who were important at various times, about what architecture they thought was interesting. You can see all of these things reflected in the graves. So I decided to write a book, not just featuring pieces of Graceland like I had done in the past in Peculiar Incident on Shady Street and Scritch Scratch, and mentioned in a couple of my other books, but to actually use it as a full setting. And to do this, I shadowed there for several months, about 4 months actually.
Wait,
I
what? It was shadowed as a job?
I went there daily. The director at Graceland, her name is Jensen Allen. In fact, I'll just show you the little dedication here is to Jensen and the staff at Graceland. It says, to
Oh,
Jensen and the
wow.
entire staff at Graceland Cemetery, thank you for taking me into your world and allowing me to experience how unique and special it is. These are some very passionate people about preserving the history that is in Graceland. They consider themselves cemeterians. If you've not heard that word, that is a person dedicated to protecting these things. And they allowed me to follow them around doing everything. I did everything from, listen to how they handle, grieving families coming in, to, how they plot new burials. I got to see inside of several of their tombs. I got to learn how burial vaults work and why they're used. And I also learned all of the specifics about Graceland that make it a very unique graveyard. And a lot of those details are in this book. A couple feet down, Graceland is actually mostly sand. So when they are digging a new grave, the second they start digging, the time is ticking, right? Because sand starts refilling that hole. There are a lot of very unique challenges, and it's a very, very old graveyard. So there was a lot for me to learn. And I just got very lucky that these were the people who work there are excited to have what they do highlighted and to have the graveyard highlighted. It was honestly just a very special experience.
That's incredible. I've heard of authors going to do research. I've never heard of
Yeah.
somebody like that deep, like shadowing the job, being there on site for 3 months?
Yeah, I felt like I had to, though, because if you think about, you know, graveyards and really the death industry as a whole, it's very mysterious. You
Mhm.
can ask people, what does someone who works in a graveyard do? I think 9 times out of 10, they're gonna say dig graves, right? I mean, we don't know what people who work in graveyards do really. And do they dig graves? Sometimes, depending on their position, right? They might be part of the landscaping crew. They might be helping to do that. But a lot of it is genealogy. A lot of it is solving mini mysteries, right? You'll have people come in who are trying to track down a long lost loved one, and because records that are that old are often bad or lost, and Chicago had the Great Chicago Fire, which destroyed a ton of records, right?
Wow.
It can be very hard to track down people. And also, people are moved over time. Entire graveyards are moved over time. Graceland Cemetery has people interred there who were originally interred in another graveyard that doesn't exist anymore. So it's one mystery after another. And I really kind of wanted to show that side of it and how fascinating it is, so that my readers are understanding there is more to a graveyard than, hey, we're going by one, hold your breath, because that was the thing we did when I was a kid, right?
Yep.
So it was fun. It was fascinating. It was scary at times, but that was the other thing I learned. These things can exist at the same time. Happiness and sadness and fear can all kind of exist at once in a place like that.
That's incredible. And I assume I don't want to get too far off track because, that is remarkable. But I also assume that you have heard some pretty interesting, maybe creepy or scary stories
Yes.
having that being that close. Is there anything that you could share with our listeners that maybe didn't quite make it into the book because you couldn't weave it in, but something scary
Um,
or interesting?
well, I can share something that I did that is in the book, but I didn't include a photo of. So one thing I'll share really quickly is that my editor at Delacorte, Ali Romig, is just the most amazing editor, and I feel like she really understands what I'm trying to do with my stories, and she understands that I want my readers to be able to experience the book on as many levels as possible. So outside of the text, she um, helped hire an amazing
Wow.
illustrator to create this map with pop outs of all of these locations that are referenced in the book. So when young readers are, or old readers, I read middle grade, are reading this book, you can kind of follow along in the mystery and see where the characters are. Similarly, in the back, there are photos. Some of these are photos I took in Graceland. Some of these are photos that were generously donated for reprinting by Graceland Cemetery. One of the photos that is not in here, but the concept is addressed in the book, and I think it's utterly frightening. To me, it was frightening to experience and to see, and I think my readers will find it scary. Is that many, many, many years ago, um, when people were brought into the cemetery to be interred or buried, if they were brought in during winter months, sometimes the ground was simply too hard to bury them. And they would kind of need to like press pause and hold on to those bodies for a little bit. And there is actually in the back of this book, you will see a photo. It looks not at all ominous because it's a beautiful building, but of the chapel here at Graceland. What you can see is just to the side of the chapel, there's actually a little tunnel that goes underground. That tunnel leads to an underground room that's kind of a stone archway, a kind of a dead end, and that is actually where they would store those bodies.
What?
Yeah, and they would just kind of be stacked up in there, kind of unceremoniously.
Oh,
And I kept visualizing, because I'm dark this way, what it would be like to be the person who was, delivering, these deceased people and having to go down into the space. It's freezing cold, it's very dark, it's pretty ominous down there, even now, even though it's certainly not used that way now. And to kind of see this stack of bodies, I think would be a very scary experience. Especially at times when you had, things like, diphtheria or tuberculosis or anything else kind of like rampaging through major cities. I would imagine that stack could be scary and a lot. So I did not share a photo of that. I think that's one of the darker elements of the book that's referenced, and I do it very gently because this is a middle grade crowd. But there you go. There's your
wow.
creepy fact of the day.
So you saw photos of that and
I saw the space.
you saw the space.
I did. I saw the space. I didn't take a photo, and I didn't include photos in the back because I think that might be a little bit much, even though there's nothing down there. It's mentioned. It comes up in the book, and I think it's something that kids will easily be able to visualize. But I don't really think they need the actual image of that
No,
one.
I figured, yeah. That's crazy. That is
It's a lot.
crazy. And
It
it's
is a
down.
lot.
And how big did you say it was?
He was pretty good size. I mean, like if I walked in, I wouldn't be able to, if I spread out my hands, I wouldn't be able to touch the walls or anything like that. Like it was a pretty good size, and it's used as nothing now, that space, but it was one of the spaces they gave me a tour of, because at the time I remember them saying that, yeah, we think this is one of the, possibly most like haunted or
Yeah.
creepiest areas of the graveyard, and like everyone who works here actually kind of tries to avoid it a little bit. And I was like, well, I need to see it now, like can we
Yeah.
go, I want to see it. And then after I saw it, I was like, actually that was pretty dark. It was kind of grim.
It reminds me of that that graveyard in Scotland. It's famous. I can't remember the name of it. But the homeless man. This has happened 30, 40 years ago. Homeless
Okay.
man was trying to get away from the rain. He went into this. I believe it's a mausoleum. He went inside of the
Okay.
building. He fell through the floor and into the bodies. It was just a pile, and
Mm.
because it was so cold underground, the bodies were actually, even though they were hundreds of years old, they were actually
Like
still
perfectly preserved.
a little bit a mix. Is kind
Ugh.
of the way it was interpreted was like it was kind of sludgy.
Ooh. Okay,
Yeah.
that's yeah, I don't
Not don't
yeah,
include that part
I
in
mean,
yours.
there's so much. There are so many legends too in Graceland that I was able to play with. You know, legends, a lot of them are rooted in some little piece of history,
Yeah.
like some actual thing that happened. And so it was very fun, to explore those and also to just be able to talk about, some of the tombs and the mausoleums. And I hope one of the things my readers walk away with is that if you find yourself near a graveyard that has mausoleums and you feel that you can be respectful, look in the window if they have one, right? Most of them were created with beauty in mind and peacefulness. They were meant for people to visit, and the only reason they're all chained up now and we can't go in is because humans have abused them and misbehaved themselves. And so I'm really hoping that my books kind of create a new generation of reader that realizes that like the only way we can really honor history is to remember it and to treat it with respect, and kind of looks at these things with a slightly different viewpoint.
So, one of the reasons why I named this story a literal journey is because, as a father of young kids, and I've done a lot of work in addiction recovery, I have seen the power of story. And when it comes to addiction recovery, I've seen people who believe one story about their lives and it leads them down a very dark path. And then once they hit rock bottom, they some of them will come around and they say, I don't want to live this way anymore. And they adopt a different story, a story about overcoming.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed around them, but they have changed because of a
Yeah.
story that they believe.
Yeah.
And so as people, go through life, go through this literal journey of life, they're bombarded with different stories to believe. And so I think it's important to share good stories that help people change their lives or turn towards something that's good.
Yeah.
And as people read your stories, as scary and as creepy as they are, I've noticed themes. I've noticed great themes about redemption, about overcoming, about overcoming fear. What is it that you hope readers come away with as they read your books? And you can point to specific examples or just general themes, but what is it
Yeah.
you hope readers come away with?
I mean, I'm like you, my kids are older now, but one of those things I always want my readers to walk away with is empathy. Empathy goes a long ways, and I feel like we're really lacking a lot of that in this world. And also this notion that sometimes the people that my characters work the closest with to solve mysteries tend to be the people that they initially can't imagine ever working with or knowing or maybe even being friends with, right? You don't have to align on everything with people to get along or to work as a team. And that's something that, when I visit schools, I'll tell kids I realize, this isn't always modeled by adults. And that's a sad thing. But I want them to recognize that friendship is extremely important, and you can find friends in unlikely places, and you can be friends with and respect people who seem very different, maybe have different viewpoints or different in personality, right? So in X Marks the Haunt, the two main characters that that my main character works with to solve this mystery are kids that he doesn't even know at the outset of this book, kids that he finds kind of intimidating, right? He has a preconceived notion of them, and has to learn to drop that, and go based on facts and the way they're treating him as opposed to maybe what he thought going into it.
So where can people follow you and find you when you're posting updates on your stories and what's going on in your world?
So I I have backed off a lot of social media, but
Good for
the
you. Good
easiest,
for you.
yeah, it's just, it's a thing. But I would say you can find me in a couple main places. One of them is my website is always updated. That is lindsaycurrie.com, just my name.com. I post, things about my books there, upcoming releases. As soon as I have something concrete to share, I usually put it there, and I have them separated out too. So I have them separated out into kind of my Delta Game series, which is an adventure mystery series, my kind of paranormal or spooky mysteries. And then I do have a brand new tab there that some of my readers have already noticed that relates to a book coming out next year that is a murder mystery. So that has its own tab as well. But you can also find me on Instagram. I'm just at Lindsay N. Currie on there. And I do have a Facebook page that is largely neglected. So maybe go there last. But yeah, those are probably the main places to find me.
All right. Well, I've never done this before for an interview, but I've got another screen over here. I'm going to order your book right now. I'm going to pre-order it.
Aw,
It'll
thank
be out.
you.
It's X Marks the Haunt. It'll be out January 6th. And
January 6th.
I just did the paperback. I normally listen to the audiobooks, but I'm gonna put it up here on the
Thank you so
shelf.
much. Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes a huge difference. So for any of your listeners who don't know this already, pre-orders actually are wildly important to authors. It shows publishers that there's interest and excitement about the book, and in a lot of cases, it can change the marketing and attention that a book gets. And plus, it just gives us all the warm fuzzies when we know you do it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you for taking the time to write it, and then of course to be on the show today. It really means a lot to me. I know you got a really busy schedule, a lot of books, and a lot of family stuff going on, and Christmas party happening.
All
I
of the
mean,
things at once. Yeah, when it rains, it pours. But yeah, some of it's all it's good. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you hosting me and letting me blabber on about creepy things that I'm passionate about.
it's
And I
mutual.
hope you like
It's
the
a
book
I love
now.
it. I love it. I love it.
Thank
I love
you.
it.
Thank you.